Serious former gang members. What incident happened that made you realize you didn't want to be in a gang anymore? Brazilian here. I was a teenager in the mid 2000s. Used to hang with a lot of other kids who were also low middle class and had a lot of time and liberty to be on the streets causing havoc. A lot of them were hooligans. In Brazil, hooligans are really common in major cities with big football teams. But it's somewhat different from those in Europe. People hang in the torcidas organizadas, wear uniforms, sometimes carry guns and fight over petty with people from other torcidas. The main goal is to beat and steal the other crew's materials, like shirts, hats, flags and this kind of s. It's not uncommon to see people die over this ridiculous nonsense. Anyway, it was a large gang, but no one did heavy stuff, like killing people, even though sometimes someone was packing a revolver or a pistol. At least I never heard of something like that. We used to beat the crap out of other people from other hoods. Though, some of us were really violent. A lot of my friends trained martial arts, just for the sake of kicking people's ass on the street. I stopped hanging around, because some of my friends got arrested for attempted murder, and they just didn't give a single F even after jail. Some of them also sold weed, and I begun to wake up to the fact that S was getting more serious. I had a lot of doubts after seeing people get wrecked over nothing. Like, random street fights were common. I saw a couple of random dudes getting their heads stepped on, noses exploded, teeth broken, people threatening others with fire weapons. I chose to focus on school, and years later I'm a lawyer with no criminal background. Thankfully, my friends from that time are doing okay, I guess. They are alive, and I think that's a good thing, considering what they used to do and how many enemies they made. I'm sorry if I made any grammar mistakes. I'm Brazilian and rarely write in English. Throwaway since I don't want any connections to my main account. I was a prospect in a motorcycle gang. Back in the days I somehow romanticized Sons of Anarchy and found myself as a hang-around at the local chapter of a well-known club. I was pretty passive, helped where I could, and just tried to blend in as best as I could. After a few weeks I was seeing them as friends. They seemed like regular guys. The most of them had pretty decent jobs and were well educated, even though the parties tended to be rough. Many people were beat up for fun and things like that. A few months later I was proposed to be a prospect, got the leather, and was the happiest guy. Things turned fast. Being more inside the club meant to know more. The guys you linked to hang around with were dealing with small firearms. Nearly everyone was secretly on drugs, even though the club rules meant that you can get drunk but not high. I stood with them, cause I still called them my buddies, until I was asked to steal electronics from a parked truck. Didn't want to end up in jail like my cousin, who got 3 years for stealing a simple radio. I denied, and without a warning I got the beating of my life. They took away my jacket and said to repeat the beating if I'm ever coming back again. Not my story, but a good friend of mine took a job as a go-go dancer at a bar where a member of the big well-known biker gang worked as a guy who kept drunks from bothering her. She grew to see him as a friend and protector. Later she got talked into working as a dominatrix for a dungeon they operated, where again, they protected her from clients. She found it all very sexy and dangerous. Cool outlaw-s with tough guys protecting her. As she got in deeper, she got pressured to do some minor sexual things with clients. Not just whips and spanks, but hand jobs. And she started getting scared they were going to pressure her into sex eventually. One night at the bar/clubhouse that they owned, she walked into the back and saw a couple guys raping a girl she knew, and she went in to stop it, naively thinking she was someone they valued and would listen to. Instead she, a 115-pound 20-year-old, got the S kicked out of her as a warning to never tell anyone about the R. She fled that world so quick after that, but always got nervous when she saw any of them, and to this day, decades later, has a lot of shame about not doing more to help that girl and being too scared to report their activities to the authorities. A couple of 3 things. A. Got too old for that SB, joined the army, and C. Realized, thankfully not too late, almost shooting a mother effer dead for talking S to my boy wasn't in my best interests long term. I think back to that point and thank F I did not do something so dumb. Cringy. Used to have a very serious drug problem. Coupled with the fact I grew up in a rough hood, it was inevitable. Basically I needed protection and drugs. But like most people here are pointing out, eventually you just get too old for that shit. Kicked my drug habit several years ago. Found an amazing girl and realized I didn't have to stay in such a dangerous spot. We moved out to the mountains, and aside from my police record and my ongoing struggle with addiction, I left those demons back in the city. For real though, you can leave your hood so easily if you want to. Took me so long to realize that. Got older and seemed stupid. Felt stupid representing a group of 7th grade dropouts. I wanted to represent myself. The ones that aren't dead or in prison still live with their parents and all they have going for them in life is that red bandana. Committed a crime with one of my boys. I was 17 and he was 18. He got caught and I didn't. He did 5 years in jail for it and he never ratted me out. I appreciated it, but also, I was turning 18 soon and I didn't want to risk jail time for other crimes. I walked away from it and never looked back. 10 plus years later, and I'm a doctor now. I feel like a completely different person. No more anger in my heart. Not really a gang, just a crew. 7 poor, misguided youth selling drugs and robbing dealers for food and fun money. We got drunk and coked up every weekend and went partying. Then by the end of the night we were doing stupid s like vandalism and end up in someone's house kicking the s out of them and jacking their stuff. Usually drugs and other syllables. People started getting too heavy into the coke. Some got into meth. Others just wanted to try and be rappers and music producers. At that time my mom was diagnosed with cancer and I needed an income to pay some bills. I had to grow up quick. Selling drugs and robbing dealers wasn't cutting it. And I ain't cut out for that life either. I slowly started losing contact. Hanging around less. Quit coke and heavy drinking. Started roofing and I was out after I didn't talk to any of them for a bit. The one, my best friend who I grew up with, didn't take it too well and thought I was just a B and whatnot. I'm a B. So be it. Age. I've been in some fucked up situations, but none of these deterred me. I was young and angry, and each time someone would make a move against me my first thought wasn't, I need to stop. It was it's time to get this person back and make them hurt worse than they hurt me. I was this way until around 21. But then I met my now wife and saw there was more to life than just walking around with a chip on my shoulder. Now I work in fashion for a mid-level label in New York City and can actually enjoy life. I keep in contact with my homies and I love them. But you can see who stayed in that life a little too long. Some are dead, and not even from violence. From depression. They aged out of that life and found that they had no options. Couldn't find a job because of their criminal record. Didn't finish school or obtain a JED, so they couldn't even join the military. I watched them go from angry to frustrated to basically pleading for opportunities. Then, bam, gone. And these were the older guys everyone thought was cool when we were younger. But eventually we realized that wasn't the case. For the others that finished school, they are doing okay. Most work blue collar or manufacturing jobs. They are happy for the most part. Or maybe just satisfied with complacency. I got roped into a skinhead gang in the late 90s because I grew up in a place where white people were a significant minority. We only made up about 15% of the population, so it was a join or die situation because white runners were seen as targets Hispanic gangs. I got roped in by the rhetoric about white people sticking together and how everything was a threat to white people, etc. I left when I realized that we were doing the same mess as all the other gangs. Selling drugs to our own people. Defending our territory while vandalizing it and treating it like S. All while preaching about how we were defending the white race. I realized it was all bulls from top to bottom. The racism stuck with me for a few years afterward. That didn't go away until I joined the military and saw that dividing along racial lines was absolute horse s and that the real threat were the rich men in suits trying to bleed us all dry. Former SBS, state prison skinhead. Here, I fell in love with a Jewish girl once I made it back home. I'll be converting soon for our wedding. She thinks I should write a book lol. My dad was a drug dealer and my mum was one of those women who wanted to court a drug dealer. And then she got pregnant with me. Long story short, it wasn't a loving childhood with plenty of opportunity and support. In Britain it really does depend on what part of the country you are in for how the gang culture works. I lived in northwest Kent at the time, which was practically London, but just not as built up. I joined a multiracial gang while I was still in school, which meant I spent most of my time drinking alcohol, smoking weed and carrying a knife. Our gang had a particular focus on violence and antisocial behavior, with the usual turf wars descending into beat 'em ups. We used to hang out on the tallest hill in our area and an abandoned set of flats right next to it. Our famous moments were two particular incidents. One was the arson attack on the abandoned flats, which burned the place to a fine crisp. Rumor was it was one of our own who, seeing that the gang was falling apart, decided to torch the place, and the other was when they sent the riot police to deal with us. The riot police incident was the beginning of the end. What had happened was every single one of us turned up on the hill for a party, about 100 or so of us. So we were all drinking, and then all of a sudden 4 police vans turned up at the bottom of the hill and started marching up with shields raised. I grabbed a drunk buddy and left with everyone who actually had a future ahead of them. But the police were combing the streets for everyone. Me and my drunk buddy hid in someone's front garden for most of it. I heard that in the end, one of the up and coming members of the gang decided to lead half of us into town under the premise they can't arrest us. We haven't done anything wrong. You can probably guess how that ended, but yeah, they all got broke up and packed into those police vans for public disturbance offenses. Later on, the gang got so large that we were pretty much pariahs in the community, not to mention the target for every single gang next to us. Lots of fighting and a bit of non-lethal stabbing in the butt basically, or with short bladed knives. None of us were stupid enough like today's kids to go down for murder by machete. And that's not even mentioning the real killer inter-gang rivalry. Large gangs normally aren't smart enough to be so organizational that they stay centralized. And we were no different. So we had 10 people all claiming they were head of the gang, and you didn't have a choice on what side you were on. You were just automatically affiliated. It all came to a head when one leader brought in a bunch of people from London and another member who said he was leader, and brought up a bunch of people from a more violent gang who we were on and off with to back him up. We were pretty much on the edge of all splitting up and becoming a bunch of all new gangs. But then the arson attack happened on the abandoned flats, and that's when the police had enough and stationed police on our turf. In the end, the new small gang I was in was under attack on the daily, and I had never been beaten up so many times in my life, which was deserved. It's not like I would have done any different in their shoes. In the end, we laid low, drew a huge effing big line between us and our cousin gangs, which appeased our old enemies, which meant we could actually walk on the streets we lived on, and then moved on with our lives. I returned to Scotland for a long while, got married and educated, came back, and thankfully no FR recognizes me. I was never initiated, but in the 6th grade I moved to town with a heavy gang presence, and everybody had some form of affiliation with a local gang. The middle school I went to was a Crip school. How silly is that? And I wanted so hard to fit in and be accepted. So I started hanging out with questionable kids. My locker mate convinced me to start selling weed out of our locker, and the whole thing felt so wrong. After doing it for a few months, he wanted me to officially be jumped in, and being someone who grew up in a house of women, single mother, 2 older sisters, I've never been in a fight in my life, and I was terrified at the idea of 8 people jumping on me. So I told my mom, and she immediately pulled me out of school, and we moved a few weeks later. I found out a year or so later that the kid who I was selling weed for was shot and killed in a robbery gone wrong at 14 years old. Every once in a while I look back at that time and think about how radically different my life would be if I had stuck with it.